The tensions are not going away. The Israel Hamas conflict has unfortunately turned the deadliest among the five Gaza wars which have been fought in recent history, with now 4,000 casualties on both sides. Israel has indicated its willingness to allow the delivery of food, water, and medicine. Growing internal discord within the US is something to take note of. President Biden should focus more on domestic hate crimes against Muslims. Many people have called out the right wing sections of the media for disseminating dehumanizing rhetoric against Palestinians. Not all Palestinians are Hamas were activists or militants, and not all of them support Hamas's tactics either. Biden should not give unconditional support to Netanyahu. Hello and welcome back to New Wave Global. I'm back with the updates once again on the Middle East and how the tragic situation continues to bedevil and the everyone around the world, all those people who want peace or at least a ceasefire, continue to be concerned about what is happening in Gaza. And of course, the tensions are not going away. The Israel Hamas conflict has unfortunately turned the deadliest among the five Gaza wars which have been fought in recent history, with now 4,000 casualties on both sides. And I'm saying Israel and Gaza, and more than 1 million people have been displaced as Israel continues its operations and strikes to eliminate Hamas. Thousands, including civilians and journalists, have been injured, and dozens are still in captivity. The United Nations has urgently called for a humanitarian ceasefire in the Israel-Hamas conflict to address the dire situation in Gaza with the ongoing conflict. The region we are talking about, Gaza, has faced severe shortages of essential supplies such as food, water, and medicine for more than 2 weeks now. In a press conference in Egypt, the Secretary General of United Nations stressed the urgent need for a ceasefire to ensure the safe and efficient distribution of humanitarian aid. He emphasized the gravity of the situation, stating, and I quote the Secretary General, "Disease is spreading, supplies are dwindling, people are dying," unquote. Israel has indicated its willingness to allow the delivery of food, water, and medicine to Gaza, and a US-based humanitarian organization delivered 47,000 hot meals to Palestinians in Gaza earlier this week. But that's not enough. I mean, we are talking about millions here. In addition to that, growing internal discord within the US is something to take note of. You know, the US State Department, some of their employees, Huffington Post reported, have been concerned about President Biden's approach to this conflict. Some departmental staff are preparing to formally express their opposition to the current policy. And this discontent has been sparked by what some State Department officials perceive as the administration's strong support for the high-handed actions in Gaza, despite concerns about Palestinian suffering and, of course, the regional implications. That's what State Department has to look at, after all. A dissenting cable, a document critiquing American policies being prepared by diplomats, Huffington Post reported on Friday, as a means of expressing their disagreement with the current approach. It is unclear how this dissent will affect the administration's policy. It might not, but at least it is a sign that there are calls for review of the US policy. Furthermore, President Biden's response to the tragic death of 6-year-old Palestinian-American boy Wadia al-Fayoumi, who was brutally stabbed to death 26 times, remember, in Chicago, and what authorities have charged as a hate crime. Biden publicly mentioned the boy's name in his primetime address to the nation, condemning the attack and expressing his commitment to stand against anti-Palestinian, anti-Arab, and anti-Muslim bigotry. The White House also made direct outreach to the family, offering condolences and asking for permission to mention Wadia in public statements. While the family has appreciated this gesture by the president and the administration, there is also frustration among many community members in the US, and the family spokespersons have expressed that. They believe that President Biden should focus more on domestic hate crimes against Muslims and provide a more even handed response to atrocities both domestically and internationally. There's also discontent, viewers, about the allocation of aid to the Middle East, with a significant disparity between funds going to Israel and those directed towards humanitarian relief efforts in Gaza. These frustrations are not limited to the public, but are also present within the White House and the campaign, as there's a perception that more should be done to address such concerns. Some have cited past presidential visits to mosques, such as President George Bush's visit after 9/11 attacks, as a reference point. At the same time, the right wing media frenzy continues, and many people have called out the right wing sections of the media for disseminating dehumanizing rhetoric against Palestinians, particularly in the context of this Israel Gaza conflict. And remember, we need to recall and reiterate, not all Palestinians are Hamas were activists or militants, and not all of them support Hamas's tactics either. This rhetoric by the right wing, characterized by xenophobia, anti Muslim sentiments, and derogatory language, has the potential to influence public opinion and contribute to hate crimes. And remember, Muslims are just 1% or so of the total US population. Studies have established a link between such rhetoric and an increase in hate crimes, particularly against Muslim communities, and it has happened before after 9/11. The impact of these divisive narratives extend to the Arab and Muslim communities who feel the after effects of such language in their daily lives. This phenomenon is seen as a contributor to a more divided and less inclusive America, impacting the nation's fabric and the realization of the so-called American dream for the immigrants and communities of color. President Joe Biden also linked Russia's invasion of Ukraine and Hamas's attacks on Israel in an Oval Office address. He called on the Congress to provide aid to both nations, addressing concerns about the disparate focus on these crises. Biden emphasized the importance of American leadership and alliances in maintaining global stability and advocated for supporting Israel and Ukraine. He has also condemned anti Semitism and Islamophobia, as I just mentioned, and has acknowledged domestic concerns. I mean, that acknowledgement should be appreciated, but there's much more that President Biden needs to do if he wants to, arrest this growing divisiveness within America. And an article in the Mother Jones by the very good journalist David Cohn argues that Biden should not give unconditional support to Netanyahu. The Israeli prime minister's track record includes failures in divisive policies, and his recent actions have worsened the conflict with Palestinians. And David Cohn says President Biden must leverage US's financial support to pressurize Netanyahu to avoid further escalation. David Cohn says that the US should not trust Netanyahu with military action because it could have global consequences. Now, remember, this split is very clear between the independent media and the corporate media, once again, on reporting on foreign policy. And perhaps the most important point that has come up in the public surveys, and that what President Biden needs to look at, and the U.S. administration needs to look at, that there's a clear call for ceasefire. Nearly 66% of likely voters say that the U.S. should call for ceasefire and de-escalation of violence in Gaza to prevent civilian deaths. Now, this is the public opinion. 66% is 2/3 of the sampled electorate. And I hope that, unlike the past, popular will or public opinion is given due consideration in such policy matters. Otherwise, we are just going to see more disasters unfolding in the Middle East and, God forbid, across the globe. I will be back tomorrow. That's all for today. And thank you for listening. And please do subscribe to our channel for updates on the foreign policy issues, but also many other topics that we cover on New Wave Global. Thank you and see you tomorrow.